What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the bearded comic bro, and I am joined by comic creator Phil Hester. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You've worked on a lot of comics. Some of my favorites. You recently just on Gotham City Year One, Family Tree. You've done work on Swamp Thing, Green Arrow. Then we haven't even talked about the stuff you've written, like Fire Breather and Mythic, and like the Anchor. Like holy buckets! Like you've done a lot of comics.
Yeah, I've been here a long time. I kind of joke to people that I'm probably in your comic collection whether you want me to be or not. You know, I'm a ubiquitous creator, I guess.
I love it. I love it. Well, I want to talk about your writing. I want to talk about, your art because you do both and you do both really well. Have you always had a love for comics though? Or as a kid,
Yeah.
like growing up and
Yeah, I think I was I got some positive reinforcement from teachers about my art when I was super young, like kindergarten level. And that sort of like put me on the path to always like, you know, express myself through art. And so when I became a proficient reader a few years after that and I saw comics, that seemed just like such a natural way to communicate to me, pictures and words together. That was like went straight to my core. So yeah, I became a comics fan right away as soon as I could read. And then I was always sort of like pilfering my older relatives, comic collections to read, like mostly from my uncles. I have a set of uncles that are only a few years older than I am. So like I would like sort of pick up what to get from them, and I would read their collection. And then when got to be about 10 and started having my own money, that's when I really became like kind of a hardcore collector.
I'm getting my nephew into comics as well. So,
Cool.
I guess it's the uncles that are keeping the
Yeah,
comics
it is. Uncles are the bad influence.
So where at then one point was it for you that where you're like, okay, this is something I love. I've gotten into collecting. You said it's from an early age where you're like, okay, I want to think like maybe this is something I want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've told this story to death, but like a lot of people haven't heard it. But when I was a kid, you couldn't be guaranteed to get the next issue of any book because
Right.
we were buying everything off the newsstand. And I read an issue of Iron Man that had like a cliffhanger ending, and I was like, I wonder how this is going to go. And I couldn't wait, and I didn't know if I'd ever see the next part. So I drew the next part. I drew how I would do it, and like a 11, 12-year-old would. But it was like enough to answer my question of how that might resolve itself. And that gave me the idea like, oh, all those names that I see at the beginning of the comic, those were all people doing what I just did, and maybe I could be one of those people. And that set me on the path to like making my own comics for myself and my friends. And then like when I graduated high school, got really serious about submitting to Marvel and DC. And then when I got into college, kept that up, kept making comics with my friends. But also that was the time of the black and white explosion. So all of a sudden you didn't have to work for Marvel or DC to work in comics. And there were a lot more publishers looking for talent, even if that talent was like not quite ready. And I was not ready, but I got work while I was in college. And to me, that was like super exciting.
Yeah. I got to ask before we move on. Did you ever find out what happened in the Iron Man
Yeah,
issue?
it ended the way I thought it would.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I was just like,
yeah,
you
no.
were like, no, my
Tony,
idea was better.
I can't remember what issue 116 or 15, like around there. But Tony Stark gets thrown off the helicarrier without his armor on, and as he's free falling, he's got to put the armor on. And this is back Marvel, this isn't like the movie style where you push a button and
Right.
the armor, like you had to put it on piece by piece. And so the next issue ended, they resolved that cliffhanger exactly the way I did. So yeah, it was
And
cool.
you're like, perfect. That's a sign.
I did it. I should do this for a living.
So you started, you were like, this is something I want to do. You were, like you said, you first got your published stuff, working and stuff in college. Where you're like, okay, this is full time now for me.
That was always my goal. Like
Okay.
I was like, and I was, when I was in college, I was also the editorial cartoonist for the college paper. And then when I got out of school, it seemed natural, like if I had to get a day job, I should get it at a newspaper. And that's back when like all these things are going to date me, but like that's back when even like a town of like 10,000 had a daily newspaper.
Right.
And so my wife got a teaching job at a town like that, and we moved there, a town called Knoxville, Iowa. And they had a paper, and I went to work at that paper. And I was like 21, and I was always trying to, like, I was getting, assignments here and there in comics. And then about age 23, 24, I got my first Marvel gig. And my first DC gig followed right after that. And that's when I bailed out on the newspaper business. And so 24 is when I made that jump to being a full-time comic book artist.
Nice. So you're like, all right, I'm stepping away from newspapers. I'm doing comics now full time.
Yeah. Well, it didn't take much either, because like I wasn't making a ton doing paste up and ad design in a small town newspaper. So like I quit when I got my very first Marvel gig, which was a mistake. Like I was doing I did a backup for an annual, and I thought, well, it's riches from here on out. But that was a good lesson for me, that like gigs come and go pretty quickly in comics. Like even if you feel like the longest gig I've ever had is Green Arrow, and that was 4 years. And if you tell that to a normal person, they're like, that feels like a short job, like I was only there 4 years. But comics jobs are sort of like, itinerant almost. Like you'll have it you'll work for a few months, and then you start thinking about the next one. And that Marvel gig was a good lesson in that. So I quit my day job, and then I went back 6 months later to the day job, which was tough. And then quit that job again 6 months after that.
So at least you left on good terms, then, it sounds like, the first time. So
yeah, I didn't burn the place down on the way out.
You do a lot of writing, you do a lot of art. Was it writing your first kind of break into it, or was it doing art?
No, it was art. I always did both. Like when I talked about all those comics I made in high school and college, I was always doing both things. And to me, they're sort of the same task. Like they just feel like different stations on the same band, like in the same radio band. And so to me, to do both seemed very natural. And it's just that there were more opportunities for artists earlier in my career, and that's sort of what I got known as. But even all that time, I was doing stuff like working on various annuals at Marvel and DC, or even starting on Swamp Thing. I was still writing stuff like short stories for places like Negative Burn or Taboo, or back then there were a lot more. Dating myself again. Back then there were a lot more anthologies around, like regularly published anthologies. Yeah. So there was a lot of room for short stories, and that's where I kind of did most of my writing and more of my experimental artwork.
Nice. Did you go into schooling for art, or like how did your I know you said you got noticed really early in kindergarten, like that teachers were giving you praise for your art. Like how did you start to formulate your art? Because it is a really unique style, which I love and I gravitate towards. And so how did that kind of come about?
It was almost like, when I was just talking about how I did, while I had those regular straight jobs, I was always kind of like, comics jobs. Yeah. I was always doing these more experimental stories that I was writing and drawing. And I thought I was going to be on this like twin track. I thought I was going to have one track where I turned into like Steve Rude or Alan Davis or whatever. And I was going to have this other track where I'd be more like Dave McKean and Ted McKeever. And those tracks, I thought that I was going to maintain both of them. But actually they kind of collided, and I got an assignment from Dark Horse Comics that was kind of a grim, like dystopian kind of book. And I thought, oh, well, that's a place where I can draw a little bit more edgy, but I can still use all the storytelling chops I learned from trying to be Steve Rude, Right. So and it wound up in the middle, like a little more angular, shadow heavy, blocky style that it persists to this day. Like even if I try to draw like a bright, shiny superhero, it's going to have that kind of have that undercurrent of like
Yeah.
darkness and angularity. And on the flip side, if I try to do something that's like pure horror or whatever, I'm still going to have that like little element of cartooning that's in there that I can't get rid of either.
Yeah.
So I'm always going to be that tweener, I think.
Well, it is, and that's why I said like, and a unique style of where if you look at something like, like you said, Green Arrow was your longest stint,
Hmm.
to then working on family trees with, dealing with nature and all that aspect to then, now this recent one of a, more noir style, like
Right.
it fits all of them in such a unique way, which I think is just has been really cool to see because I'm always like, what are you going to do next?
Yeah, I wish I knew. Um, like, but as long as as long as people will have me, I think right now I'm benefiting from like younger creators that are sort of coming into their own, remembering me from Green Arrow or remembering me from Swamp Thing, and like I mean, even like as far back as like when I started working with Kevin Smith,
Yeah.
it was because he remembered me from Swamp Thing, you know? And I'm not that much older than him. Like that's the thing about comics is like the generation you admire, sometimes they're only 5, 6 years older than you are.
Yeah.
It's like rock and roll is like that too, or hip hop, anything. So like I think I've been benefiting from that ever since Swamp Thing. Like people remembering me from reading my books when I was younger and sort of accepting my style because it wasn't an easy like when I came on, it wasn't like a super easy road to hoe.
Right.
Like people wanted, especially the powers that be at Marvel and DC, were not as open to like wild styles as they are right now. They're open to their tastes have broadened quite a bit. Like somebody is brilliant. Like I think Riley Rossmo is brilliant,
Yeah.
but he could not get hired when I started. He would not be hired at Marvel or DC. But thankfully, I think largely due to the influence of the editors and publishers growing up reading indie books and reading manga, their idea about what superheroes should look like has kind of broadened, which has also benefited me.
Do you have a preference that you lean towards of wanting to write or doing art?
Yeah, this is going to sound really like kind of self-serving, but I'd rather write because it's easier. Like I have, I mean, they're both taxing and they're
Yeah.
both require like a lot of imagination and a lot of hard work. But I've never been bent over a drawing board writing at 4 in the morning, and I have been drawing, and it is more work to sort of visualize this stuff that you can dash off in a few seconds writing.
Mm.
The artist has to realize all that and bring it to life, and also make the storytelling make sense, and that's a heavy lift.
Yeah.
And artists are paid appropriately for that; they're paid more. Um, but yeah, I'd rather be writing because you're going to find out if you talk to me long enough that I'm not like a huge fan of my own artwork.
Mm.
So I like to write for other artists and see what they can do with it.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna mention that you don't do your own art often on a book, right? Like if you're writing
No,
the book, you have other art, you bring in other artists to do what you wanted to do, right?
yeah, often because I try to be objective about my skill set, and I try to think, am I the right person to draw this book? And usually the answer is no. Sometimes it's yes. Like I draw The Wretch. That's a book I've been working on. I worked on like in my late 20s, early 30s, and I did everything. I wrote and drew it, and I had friends help me out with inking or we do jam stories and stuff. But largely it was stuff I wrote and drew. And there, like I said, there are short stories here and there where I do both. But if I'm casting myself objectively as the artist of a book, I have to look at it and say, like, would I be the right artist for the coffin? And the answer is no. It needed somebody a little bit more realistic, like
Mm.
Huddleston was. And am I the right artist for Fire Breather? No, I didn't have that kind of like bouncy, cartoony, like youthful vigor that Andy Kuhn had when he drew it. So, just each thing I have to look at and say, am I the right guy to do this?
Yeah.
And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And then there's also time constraints kind of also play a role. So like if I have a drawing assignment, I can't take time off to draw a book also. So I'll have to find someone to work with.
Yeah, and you mentioned Fire Breather, and it is a great. I
Yeah,
recommend if
thank
someone
you.
hasn't picked up the trade before, like read it. It's fantastic. So, how is that then? How is your process when you're picking some? Do you get to pick artists, or is that a process with you and editorial?
Yeah, it's different when you're doing a creator owned thing. It's closer to dating. Like you find somebody that you're in tune with,
Yeah,
and that you can trust, and like creatively you're on the same page, and then you decide if you're going to get engaged and get married on this book. And that's sort of what a like an indie collaboration is like. It's a marriage. You're not hiring somebody. You're looking for a partner. And so like I don't uh there may be a few exceptions, but largely anytime I do a creator owned thing, it's 50-50 with me and the artist, and we're partners forever.
yeah,
And that's sort of why there hasn't been more Fire Breather, because like Andy like hasn't been up for doing it, so I haven't gone and looked for somebody else to do it.
mm,
Um, and that's just like, I mean, that's part of my ethos. Like we're partners on this, so like if that's what you want to do, that's cool, and if it's not, we won't. I'll do something else. So yeah, you have to find your own, and that's for writers. That's really the hardest part of the gig, is to find someone that's willing to come along with you on that journey when there's not a lot of money up front.
right.
Um, Even at Image, there's not a lot of money up front, and so that's the toughest part about being an up and coming writer.
Yeah.
But when you're working for Marvel or DC, they'll usually like present you a list of available artists. But if like I meet so many great artists on the convention circuit that like anytime I have an assignment like that and an editor goes, "Who do you want to draw it?" There's like a list in my head already
Yeah.
of people I've met that I can't wait to work with.
How much has being an artist yourself helped you when it comes to collaborating with someone else from the writing standpoint of a
Yeah,
book?
that's a really great question, because different artists have different strengths.
Yeah.
Like some are great like illustrators, but not great storytellers, and vice versa. And the only real part of my game that I feel confident in is my storytelling. So if I'm working with an illustrator that's like just starting out or isn't a great storyteller, I'll go as far as to like lay pages out for them,
Mm.
and then basically present them with like a little mini comic of what I want the comic to be, and they'll work from that. Um, but if they're a really gifted storyteller, I'll sort of step back and let them take more of that burden. And being an artist myself has given me, I think, a pretty good radar about what to ask of an artist. Like I don't want to step on toes. I don't want to say I don't trust your storytelling, so here's my storytelling. Um, I only want to do that if they're open to it or if they want it. And so, being an artist myself, I have a pretty good idea about like the job expectations of the art side of things.
Yeah.
And I keep Family Tree is a great example of that. The way Jeff and I worked on Family Tree, we both do both jobs, so we both know when to like back off and let the other person like take the fore. And I think the result was like a satisfying book.
Yeah. Oh, it again, another one. If you haven't read Family Tree King, read it. It is a very
There it
satisfying book.
is. Yeah.
I was gonna ask the flip side of that. You've worked with some great writers as well, Warren Ellis and Jeff Lemire and Tom King. Like, how is that process then on the flip side as the artist then working with those talented, like you could just kind of mention it with Jeff Lemire there.
Yeah, I can sort of put my writer brain, I can like click off the writer brain and just like do what they want to do. But as I'm working through, as I'm doing the storytelling, I'll see like moments arise that I think, well, this isn't in the script, but I think this could help the story, and then I'll bring that to them. I would never do it without permission,
Right.
but I'll bring it to them and say, hey, if we change this angle, or if I added this character to this scene, it could like accentuate what you're trying to do here. But I would never like think to like suggest dialogue or anything like, or suggest, oh, this plot's not working. I would never do anything like that. I would just I try to be a director of a screenplay.
Right.
So if there's places where the screenplay can be accentuated by a shot choice or uh, like a stage setting or something like that, then I will bring it up with a writer and we'll work it out.
Yeah. So typically when you are doing art on a book, because you're not usually writing it and doing the art yourself, is that kind of the same process of like people have a list of like, oh, I want to get Phil to write or to do art on this book, and they reach out to you? Like, because I know you
Yeah,
said Green Arrow.
I guess somehow that happened. Yeah, I don't know how I got on anybody's list, but I'm glad I'm there.
So like, for example, like Family Tree or Gotham City, were those that were editorial reached out to you and said, hey, or the art writer reached
Um,
out?
Jeff Jeff reached out to me on Family Tree, and Ben Abernathy, our editor on Gotham City, reached out to me on that. But I think Tom calls his shots, so like he gets the artist he wants. But
Yeah.
I've been lucky that like I really great writers have wanted to work with me over the last few days. I mean, I coming out of the gate, I got lucky. I worked with Grant Morrison and Mark Miller like right out of the gate, and to not like even if I wasn't a writer at the beginning of that, after 25 years, 30 years drawing for writers like that, I should pick up something.
Yeah.
Like I should be able to write a little bit after that. You know, so yeah, like I look back on my collaborators and I feel like I've lived a charmed life.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, I listed a few. You've listed more. Like you've worked with a lot on both ends of the spectrum of art and who are just really talented people. What is your process when it comes to art? Like, so you get pitched this idea for like say Family Tree. Like, where's the process for you of figuring like this is where I feel like I want to take the art direction?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I've been doing this a long time and I keep saying 25, but it's really closer to 35. um, but I've been doing this a long time. So I look at two things. I look at what the story needs. That's the number one thing.
Mhm.
Like, what does this story need? And then the second factor is how can I grow as an artist by doing this? And so number one will always trump number two. Like I will always do what's best for the story. But at this stage of my career, I'm 56. At this stage of my career, I need to do stuff that challenges me, or that puts me in a different like comfort zone and forces me to learn how to do things differently. And to me, Family Tree, like for a while, I was doing Family Tree and Justice League at the same time, and that was sort of like a great, like this is a real test of like I have one foot on each horse, in the rodeo. So I had to do something that was like action packed and bright at the same time I was doing something dark and creepy, and I had to shift gears like in the same working day. I would be like, okay, that page is done now. That like page of a tree eating a person is done. Now I got to do a page of Superman. And um, and I've been really lucky that my collaborators have trusted me to kind of um, seek out things that sort of push it. Like Gotham City, like I really pushed like what I could do with layouts, I think. And for me, that was like the fun to explore that sort of um, experimentation on the page. And I think it paid off.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because again, they're just completely different, what the story requires, I think, when it comes to an art style. And so, I remember when I got Gotham City Year One was announced and, Tom King writing, and then I saw your name attached to the art. I was like, oh, we getting like this gritty
Yeah.
film noir. I'm like, let's
Yeah.
go. And I was intrigued for that. So like you said, like you're always trying to step out and grow. And so like for this,
Mhm.
it seems like the layouts for Gotham City were kind of challenging you and making you grow a little bit more.
Yeah. I was trying to think about like, I thought at least visually, the theme of that book, and not just visually, but the theme of that book was like how I'm not going to spoil anything for anybody, but that's how actions in the past sort of reverberate through time.
Yeah.
So to like bring that home, I would like try to use identical compositions at different points in the story, even if they were issues or years apart.
Mhm.
And the drawing, it wasn't like a repeated panel, but it was the repeated composition, and the figures were made to fit them in different ways. And that was like like my way of at least subconsciously trying to get across the like things you think are in the past are never dead. They're going to keep popping back up.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to like push. Um, I'm like I hate guided view. Like that's like my I'm Mr. Positive, but that's like the one thing I don't like about comics. It's like because I think the page itself has a character.
Mm.
It's sort of a it's the first panel you see is the whole page altogether, right? So it needs to have a storytelling character. And I think I got that across in Gotham City where I was like, when you see a page, it like, you notice it's like, oh, this page is going up, this page is going down, this page is chopped into little bits. And I think all those reflected moments in the story that needed that. So I don't know if anyone will ever get that stuff or appreciate that stuff, but for me, that's what was intriguing about working on that book.
Yeah, well, because you're right. Like it's not just sequential of like this is the path that you go. Like you switch it up a little bit throughout the stories, and
Yeah.
I think to do that, I know you said earlier you're not as you're your least favorite fan of your own art.
Yeah.
But like I think that's a testament to like you have to be talented at a level to be able to do that of switching up the compositions for the layouts a little bit like that.
Yeah, I will say if you can't draw, you better be able to do you better be able to do that other stuff. And that's what I try to do.
Uh, so I mean, you've done art on so many different styles. Is there a style of book that like you gravitate towards more of indie comics when you're doing art, or superheroes, or like something like a gritty Gotham City? Like,
As a reader,
yeah,
yeah, I'm one of those people like you ever meet like a music critic or whatever that's like, "Oh, I love all kinds of music." And you're like, "Whatever." You don't really love all kinds of you don't love hip hop and bluegrass, you know, but I'm that guy for comics,
yeah.
like those people do exist. Like I'm in love with the form.
Mhm.
And so like wherever it takes me, like if it's like totally art comics or lit comics or kids graphic novels or manga or whatever or superheroes, horror, I'll go wherever it takes me because I just love to see the way people um, the cool thing about this art form is it's sort of like the art form of the people. There's like nothing between you and putting a comic online. Absolutely nothing. And like people, and you don't have to be great at drawing, you don't have to be great at writing, you just have to want to do it. And to see the kind of like, um, it's almost like DIY, like to see the way they figure it out and do it is really exciting to me. It's like endlessly exciting to me.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate it on two ends. Like I can appreciate somebody that's like a master of their craft and I want to see how they do it and how they've perfected it. But then I also want to see the lo-fi stuff where people are just like hammering it out.
Yeah.
And like I want to see your mini comic. I want to see what you can do. So I'm like I am that guy that seems like a phony, like pretending to be into everything. But I am. I just love I love comics.
So if comics had a Spotify, your Spotify would be
Yes.
all over.
I, I'm that pitchfork writer for comics.
So you sound like such an avid comic fan already. Like, is it easy for you to just fall into like still reading a comic and embracing it and like shutting off like the creator side, or do you still like I would do this differently, or like how
Yeah,
is that?
the creator side never dies.
Right.
But I feel like I'm good about turning it off till the end of the story.
Okay.
So like I'll read something like I'm not going to mention what it is, but I read something that's probably going to win a ton of Eisners this year, and I was like, oh, I can see why this is brilliant, and I love this thing. It's brilliant, but it's missing this element of this creator's work that I thought was really special.
Mm,
And I don't know if anyone else will miss it, but I miss it. But I'm good about holding off until I've consumed the whole thing until I have those feelings, you know. Um, and it's not like a judgment. I'm not like, oh, that I reject that thing.
right.
It's just that my critical eye, I can't turn my critical eye off. So it's always going to be like, and I think that's mostly, it's not like me attacking those works.
Right.
That's me like every time I consume a work like that, I consider it a part of my education.
Yeah.
So when I look at something and I see what did or didn't work, that's what I'm trying to like absorb.
As someone who has an appreciation and love for so many different genres of comics, do you gravitate towards one that you writing, let's go writing and art style, like do you gravitate towards one that you really like doing more of?
Um, as a writer, I probably like to write horror more than anything else. Um, but as far as drawing, like, well, and then I'm like, when I say, what do I love to draw monsters. So like, I guess that's horror too. But like that comes from like seeing Swamp Thing when I was very young in my uncle's on my uncle's pool table. You know, I saw Swamp Thing laying there, and I was like, I have to check this out. And it was like it just really spoke to me. Like it was cool like Spider-Man, but it was darker and it was grotesque and and that sort of like felt like forbidden fruit, and that's what kind of drew me into like that sort of those dark corners of comics that
Yeah.
I still love. So like as I was working on Gotham City, I was even thinking like, man, my next thing better have a monster in it. You know, like I've drawn too many real people for this book.
That's that's great. Gotham City, you said you want to draw monsters, work on monsters next. You know, what what are you working on right now that you can talk to us about or can tell us that you
Yeah.
got coming up here as we're wrapping up today?
I'm like, well, like I told you earlier and previously before this interview began, like a lot of my time right now is devoted to like hospice care for my mother-in-law, which is
Yeah.
sort of like given me like the longest like career break in my in my life. Like I haven't drawn since like the end of February, which is like a record for me. But I'm sort of creeping in and doing a few things here and there. Like I'm writing and drawing a short story for Oni's new science fiction
Nice.
anthology
Yep.
called Zeno. I would call it Zeno. It's Xino. And I'm working on another high profile anthology that's not announced yet.
Okay.
Um, but those are about the speed I can take as long as I'm in this caregiving role.
Right.
And then after that, I'm really spoiled. Like I said before, like I'm really blessed with these writers that want to collaborate. And there's like a huge name that I've loved to work with, and we're trying to get together on something. And as soon as my schedule clears up, I think I'll jump both feet in with him.
Nice. Nice. That's exciting to hear because again, like I love your stuff. I love both aspects of the comic world that you are involved in and you dig deep into. So I look forward to when your schedule allows it to see
Yeah.
what you bring. So um well, Phil, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about comics with me. Where can people follow along you with what you're doing, what you're creating so they can stay up to date?
Right. I have a fan run Facebook page. It's actually run by my assistant, so we call it a fan page. But people can like see news there, and they can reach out to me there. And then also, I'm on Twitter. I'm just at Phil Hester on Twitter.
Nice. So gang, if you're watching this, I'll have all the descriptions in the below of the video, or if you're listening to the podcast, same in the descriptions of that. Go check out Phil's work. Go check out the back catalog. We've talked about so many there's so much comics that we could talk about. We just like touched on little bits of each to just give as much as we could the respected time, but definitely go back into the back catalog for sure. So
Thanks, Greg.
yeah, Phil, thanks again for just taking some time out of your schedule to talk about comics with me. So
It's my pleasure, and I'll do it anytime.
absolutely. So, with that being said, gang, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.